A female sorceress with the ability to foresee others' futures was saved by a pregnant noblewoman. Upon awakening, the sorceress saw the woman's pregnant belly and immediately froze. She perceived that the child the noblewoman carried would become the queen of the Joseon Dynasty. But before she could congratulate the woman, the sorceress's face turned serious. She also foresaw that, despite the child's destined queenly status, this very destiny would bring about her demise. Because the noblewoman had saved her life, just before the noblewoman departed, the sorceress vowed to protect the child. Despite risking her own life, the sorceress was unfortunately embroiled in court intrigue and soon arrested. Before her death, she entrusted her friend, also a sorceress, with the protection of the noblewoman's child. She told her friend that she foresaw two contenders vying for the throne in the child's future. When her friend asked the child's name, the sorceress didn't know. Urged by the guards, the two parted ways. Shortly after, the sorceress was executed by being quartered. As she died, Joseon's future queen was born. Her parents named her Yeon-woo. 13 years later, the sorceress's friend had become the royal sorceress. Yeon-woo had grown into a beautiful and intelligent girl. Because her brother had passed the highest civil service examination, the Gwaegyo, Yeon-woo accompanied her mother to the palace to witness the announcement ceremony. A butterfly caught Yeon-woo's attention. She intently pursued the butterfly, failing to notice the crown prince attempting to scale the palace wall to escape. The crown prince, captivated by the charming girl before him, stared without blinking. When Yeon-woo turned around, their eyes met, causing the crown prince to accidentally slip from the wall and Yeon-woo to fall. Both stood up awkwardly. The crown prince formally asked Yeon-woo why she was in the palace. Unaware of the crown prince's true identity, Yeon-woo suspected him of being a thief. As they argued, servants searching for the crown prince overheard them and rushed towards them. The crown prince pulled Yeon-woo, running through the palace to escape. Their flight further solidified Yeon-woo's suspicion that he was a thief. The crown prince, having no other choice, lied, claiming he was searching for his estranged brother, who had been banished from home and worked as a palace servant. This elicited Yeon-woo's sympathy, and she vehemently criticized the concubine system in front of him. After leaving the palace, the crown prince sent a handkerchief to Yeon-woo through a maid. If she could decipher its meaning, she would learn his identity. At home, Yeon-woo unfolded the handkerchief. She pondered over its meaning for a long time, unable to understand. Yeon-woo went out to the yard, writing and drawing on the ground. Suddenly, she understood the meaning, the day represented by a circle drawn and a square written. It wasn't about the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. The small sun day represented the crown prince. Remembering their conversation, Yeon-woo fell to the ground. But in reality, the crown prince wasn't concerned about Yeon-woo's criticism of the state system. On the contrary, her intelligence captivated him. Besides the crown prince, another person who couldn't forget Yeon-woo was his half-brother, Yeong-myung. Yeong-myung was not favored by their father. He was a close friend of Hyo-yeong, Yeon-woo's brother, and had known Yeon-woo earlier. Within a few days, due to the crown prince's unruly behavior, all his tutors resigned in anger. The king appointed Hyo-yeong, the newly appointed top scholar, as the crown prince's tutor. Princess Minhwa, upon seeing Hyo-yeong, seemingly experienced love at first sight. She fell for him instantly, unable to tear her gaze away. The princess couldn't contain her feelings for this incredibly handsome man. During his studies, everyone made way for him. Even the dining hall attendant treated him with special favor. Whenever he went out, young women would stop to look at him. Even those who wished to fight him would concede upon seeing his striking and radiant face. Upon entering the palace maids were captivated, some even fainting. When Hyo-yeong first met the crown prince, the young man, seeing such a handsome young tutor, was somewhat displeased. How can someone so young teach me? The first lesson proved awkward for Hyo-yeong. Upon returning home, Yeon-woo saw her brother's dejection, and immediately knew the crown prince had deliberately made things difficult. She offered her brother advice. The next day, Hyo-yeong returned to teach the crown prince. As before, the crown prince remained silent, playing by himself. Hyo-yeong, therefore, declared the lesson over and stood up to leave, precisely falling into the crown prince's trap. The crown prince immediately mocked Hyo-yeong as having a thick face, receiving a salary from the state without teaching anything. Hyo-yeong remained calm. He had anticipated this reaction. He addressed the crown prince directly. "If your highness dislikes me, I will propose a riddle. If you solve it, I will resign and never return." Hearing "never return," the crown prince became intrigued and agreed. Yeon-woo asked, "What can instantly cast the whole world into darkness or light?" The crown prince chuckled. "This is too simple," but Yeon-woo replied, "Give me your answer during the next lesson. Don't assume everything is simple." This undermined the crown prince's confidence, and he began searching for the answer in books. Princess Minhwa, seeing servants carrying books to her brother's room, entered out of curiosity. Upon hearing the riddle, she immediately said, "Could it be eyelids?" The crown prince dismissed her answer, saying she was thinking too superficially. In the third lesson, the crown prince offered his answer, a king's policies. He cited examples from books. If policies are clear, the people's lives will be prosperous. Conversely, hardship and difficulties will cast everything in darkness. As the crown prince boasted, awaiting victory, Yeon-woo said, "The correct answer is eyelids." The crown prince flew into a rage, accusing Yeon-woo of deliberately teasing him. Yeon-woo responded unflinchingly and without arrogance. "Is it only the answers that suit your highness's liking that are considered correct? Are answers only to be found in books? Everything in the world is a question, and everything in the world is an answer. In learning, one must avoid two things: arrogance, believing oneself to possess all the answers, and judging all issues based solely on one's own perspective." The crown prince was not unintelligent. Seeing Yeon-woo's defiance, he recognized a true teacher. Immediately, the crown prince bowed, showing his respect for Yeon-woo. All of this was overheard by the king and the court officials outside. The king desperately needed loyal people like Yeon-woo to counter hostile forces. News of the crown prince's respect for his tutor quickly reached the princess. This greatly piqued her curiosity about the person who had made her arrogant brother Bo. She wanted to see him. Just as the crown prince and Yeon-woo left the study to eat, the princess caught a glimpse and could not forget Yeon-woo. Minhwa petitioned her father to allow her to study with the crown prince, but was refused. The state councillor Hyung, the nephew of the queen dowager, used this opportunity to suggest to the king that they find a study companion for the princess. The king inquired about suitable candidates. Another powerful official immediately suggested the daughter of state councillor Hyung, Bo Kyung. Clearly, Hyung had planned this beforehand, aiming to place his daughter in the palace to secure the position of crown princess. The king understood this. He agreed to the proposal, then used the opportunity to include the daughter of the grand scholar, Yeon-woo, as a study companion for the princess. This arrangement made both Hyung and the queen dowager aware of the king's intent to curb the queen dowager's influence at court. They needed to accelerate their efforts to secure Bo Kyung's position as crown princess. Meanwhile, someone was performing a ritual for a deceased friend. This was the current royal sorceress, a close friend of the deceased sorceress. Before her execution, the sorceress had asked her to protect a girl. But now, she didn't even know the girl's name. As Yeon-woo stepped from the carriage, the sorceress standing nearby gasped. She clearly saw the girl's future, the visage of a legendary queen. Immediately afterward, another palanquin arrived at the palace gates. It was Bo Kyung, Hyung's daughter. The sorceress also saw this girl's destiny and recalled what her friend had said 13 years earlier. Joseon would have 2 moons, 2 queens. Now, both stood before her. The three entered the palace together. The 2 girls knelt before the queen dowager. The sorceress stood behind a screen. It turned out the queen dowager had orchestrated this meeting to determine which girl held the destiny of the future queen. Bo Kyung, Hyung's daughter, lacked that destiny, but could firmly seize the position. Yeon-woo, the grand scholar's daughter, possessed the queen's destiny, but carried a deadly omen. When the meeting concluded, the queen dowager summoned the sorceress to inquire about the results. The sorceress congratulated the queen dowager, saying everything would go as planned, that Bo Kyung would become mistress of the palace. The sorceress knew she had to answer this way, otherwise Yeon-woo wouldn't survive the next day. Since Bo Kyung belonged to the queen dowager's family, she and Hyung had planned to bring Bo Kyung into the palace to interact with the crown prince, vying for the position of crown princess. Securing the future queen's position would solidify the family's power. The sorceress left with a grave expression. 13 years ago, her friend had asked her to protect a girl destined to be queen. That girl was Yeon-woo. While waiting, Princess Yeon-woo and Bo Kyung began to converse. Yeon-woo wanted to be friends, but Bo Kyung showed disdain. She recalled her father's instructions. In the palace, making enemies is taboo. Never reveal your true thoughts, especially to your enemies. Bo Kyung quickly changed her expression, saying they should look out for each other in the future. Later, the two began their studies with the princess. Because the princess favored Hyo-yeom, Yeon-woo's brother, she naturally showed more affection towards Yeon-woo. Bo Kyung's coldness intensified her resentment. The three met with the king. The king told an ancient story and asked the two girls for its meaning. Bo Kyung, primarily educated in women's virtues and not extensively in literature, couldn't answer. Yeon-woo replied, "This is the story of Wang Wang, a renowned official of the Han Dynasty. In the present context, Your Majesty likely intends for us to understand that we should not reveal what we see in the palace." Hearing this, the king nodded approvingly. In his heart, he had accepted Yeon-woo as his daughter-in-law. Bo Kyung was furious. Hyung witnessed all this. Upon returning home, he reprimanded his daughter for her ineffectiveness. Bo Kyung defended herself. Yeon-woo has deep connections within the palace. The princess loves her brother, so she naturally gains the princess's favor. Moreover, someone of royal lineage, Lee H1, has written to Yeon-woo. Hyung couldn't believe it. He repeated the name. Bo Kyung answered Lee H1 as she had secretly read the letter. The next day, Hyung rushed to the palace to see the Queen Dowager. They learned that the Crown Prince and Yeon-woo already knew each other. They had to act quickly. They couldn't let the Crown Princess position fall to someone else. To meet Yeon-woo, the Crown Prince asked the eunuch to send her a letter, but the eunuch mistakenly sent it to Bo Kyung. Bo Kyung took the letter to the Crown Prince's quarters. The Crown Prince turned around and discovered it wasn't Yeon-woo. He was so surprised his eyes nearly popped out. After apologizing, the Crown Prince hastily left. Bo Kyung, however, remained calm, deliberately letting the palace maids see her leaving the Crown Prince's quarters. As she had foreseen, news quickly spread through the palace. Upon learning that the king had summoned the Crown Prince, despite the prince's explanation, he was still reprimanded for his feelings, which could make Yeon-woo a victim of courtly struggles. Hearing this in court, the Crown Prince seemed to understand, yet he couldn't relinquish his feelings for Yeon-woo. The king realized the need to quickly decide on a Crown Princess to prevent further problems. A few days later, the king declared a nationwide ban on marriages for girls aged 12 to 16, preparing them for the selection of the Crown Prince's consort. That evening, the palace held a grand celebratory banquet, with the royal sorceress performing a ritual. She appeared at the banquet as if her soul had left her body, warning Yeon-woo to escape quickly and avoid the selection. In a flash, everything returned to normal. Yeon-woo could no longer find the sorceress. A masked man appeared and pulled her away. Removing his mask, he revealed himself to be the Crown Prince. He expressed his genuine feelings for Yeon-woo, resolving their previous misunderstanding. She didn't run. She wanted to participate in the selection. At this moment, Yang Myung, who loved Yeon-woo, and Bo Kyung, who loved the Crown Prince, were both observing from a distance. The competition for the Crown Princess position intensified. For the first time in his life, Prince Yang Myung petitioned his father, requesting a wife. Surprisingly, he explicitly stated his desire to marry Yeon-woo, the Grand Scholar's daughter. The king was astonished, as Crown Prince Lee H1 had just made the same request. He, too, desired Yeon-woo. The king scolded the Crown Prince for betraying the fundamental principles of the state. The selection of the Crown Princess had an established process. All decisions rested with the Queen Dowager, the head of the palace. However, the Crown Prince knew the Queen Dowager would undoubtedly manipulate the process, giving the position to Hyung's daughter. At this point, the entire court buzzed with the news that Bo Kyung would become the mistress of the Crown Prince's quarters. The Crown Prince negotiated with the king. First, he would reform the selection process, and then the king would conduct a fair selection. The king also wanted to see how the future heir would defeat the Queen Dowager. Therefore, he agreed. Now, Grand Prince Yang Myung also petitioned for marriage. The king, naturally, refused. Yang Myung left the palace in despair. Two sons loving the same girl troubled the king. Leaving the palace, he encountered Princess Minhwa. She made an unusual request. After some circumlocution, Minhwa said, "I'm grown up. Please, father, arrange my marriage." And she chose Yeon-woo, Yeon-woo's brother, as her intended. This surprised the king, who immediately refused. Yeon-woo was the scholar the king had chosen as the most outstanding, intending for him to support the crown prince against Di Hyang's influence in the future. If Yeon-woo married, by regulation, he could no longer hold any political office in the court. The princess, unable to understand this, burst into tears. This greatly worried the king. Yeon-woo's family was also in a difficult situation. Yeon-woo advised his sister not to participate in the selection, as Bo Kyung was already chosen. If Yeon-woo attempted to participate and failed in the final round, she would be unable to marry and would live a lonely life. But Yeon-woo didn't want to give up on the crown prince. Similarly, the crown prince didn't want to give up on Yeon-woo. The crown prince didn't wait idly. He summoned someone. This person was the head of the Seongjun Gwan, the Office of State Scholars. Because the scholars held a strong sense of patriotism, they did not want to see the powerful noble families engaging in corruption and political interference. With the support of the crown prince, the next day, a group of scholars gathered in front of the palace gate to ask the king to remove the interference of the external forces and make a fair choice for the crown princess. The king read the letter and realized that the crown princess had finally grown up. This move, using the power of others to oppose the queen mother and taking advantage of public opinion to restrain the forces of the maternal relatives, was really not bad. The king also took advantage of this. Early in the morning, in front of all the officials, the king approved the scholar's letter. The selection of the crown princess would break the traditional rule decided by the queen mother. The competition would be supervised by the king and the officials to ensure fairness. Hearing the news, the queen mother could not bear it. She went to the king and asked to cancel the order. The king seemed to speak gently, but in fact he was very determined. In his heart, he could not bear the maternal relatives, led by the queen mother, doing whatever they wanted. The queen mother brought up the incident 13 years ago. Her family helped the king consolidate power. The king began to get angry. At that time, Prince Woo-yong, the king's brother, was unjustly killed. The king could not clarify the truth, because in order to protect his mother, he fulfilled his filial duty. The queen mother could not say anything more. Finally, the king affirmed that the selection of the crown princess would be conducted fairly. The queen mother was extremely angry, and returned to her palace. She decided that she would not stop at fighting for the position of crown princess this time. The tense situation inside the palace and outside was no better. Yeon-woo's mother was adjusting her gestures and actions. Looking at her daughter, she shed tears. Everyone knew that Yeon-woo might never return. Why was her daughter still so stubborn? The mother hugged Yeon-woo tightly. Walking to the backyard, she looked at the moon in the sky. Yang Myung slowly approached. He came to say goodbye to Yeon-woo. He didn't want to see the girl he loved fail in the selection and end up living alone for the rest of her life. Yang Myung told Yeon-woo that if she agreed, he could take her far away, living with a new name. No need for the position of prince, just Yeon-woo. But Yeon-woo just thought it was a joke. Yang Myung smiled and said that it was really just a joke. After blessing Yeon-woo, Yang Myung left. The selection of the crown princess had begun on time. After 2 rounds of selection, out of thousands of girls, only 3 remained in the final round. The king asked a personal question. He asked the girls, "If I were to convert my worth into money, how much would it be?" The first girl, who didn't understand money, said a series of numbers from millions to billions. Next, Bo Kyung replied very eloquently, "The king's virtue is as vast as the mountains and the seas, and cannot be measured by money. Only when there is something that can measure the height of the sky and the depth of the sea, can the king's virtue be measured." This answer was considered perfect. The king and the queen mother both smiled. Finally, Yeon-woo replied, "The king's value is a tael." The officials and the king were all surprised. Yeon-woo explained, "For the people, a tael is greater than the sky. The king is the sky of the people. His benevolent policies allow everyone to have a tael. Therefore, he is a tael, the father of the people." This answer pleased the king very much. Yeon-woo won the selection. But the queen mother was not happy. Yeon-woo was not her person. she wanted to get rid of the girl. Dissatisfied with the result, Princess Minghua, who loved Yeon-woo's brother, asked her mother to beg the king to revoke the decision. She threatened that if she did not marry the person she loved, she would die. But the queen did not indulge her and scolded her. Thus, Yeon-woo successfully became the crown princess. Hearing this news, the crown prince was overjoyed. One afternoon, he sent Yeon-woo a gift. The two little lovers were immersed in happy moments, waiting for the day they would officially become husband and wife. But they did not know that the happy time was running out. Not long after, in the evening, the queen summoned the national female shaman. Before the wedding, the crown princess was protected by the king's men, so poisoning or assassination was impossible. She asked the shaman to use magic to eliminate Yeon-woo. The shaman was very embarrassed because a close friend had asked her to protect Yeon-woo. But the queen mother threatened to eliminate the Star Palace, leaving the mage with no choice but to compromise. On a dark night, the Queen Dowager went to the Starry Pavilion, carrying Yeon-woo's birth information. A sorcerer burned the information and began a spell. A column of black smoke rose from the incense burner, instantly traversing the palace gates and entering Yeon-woo's chambers like a constricting rope. Yeon-woo slowly crawled towards the door, but ultimately collapsed, and the black smoke dissipated. The Queen Dowager asked the sorcerer if the deed was done. He replied that Yeon-woo would fall gravely ill and die. The queen opened the door to reveal the princess trembling with fear. The spell required a sacrifice to curse Yeon-woo, the princess herself. The princess had struck a deal with the Queen Dowager. In exchange for her participation, the Queen Dowager would help her gain Hyo-yeon, the man she loved. From then on, Yeon-woo was bedridden and unable to rise. All royal physicians were baffled by her illness. How could someone so gravely ill marry the crown prince? Days later, during a court session, the debate over Yeon-woo's continued candidacy as crown princess began. Lee Hyung led the charge, arguing that Yeon-woo's severe illness rendered her unfit to bear the royal lineage, demanding her replacement. The king, though regretful, conceded, citing Lee H1. Yeon-woo was banished from the palace. The crown prince, weeping, rushed to her, but was stopped by guards, witnessing his beloved sacrifice to court intrigue. The Queen Dowager watched from afar. She and Lee Hyung had orchestrated everything. To secure the crown prince's allegiance, they needed to keep him firmly in their grasp. She summoned the crown prince, telling him he must obey the rules of heaven. He asked what those rules were. She replied that Yeon-woo should live a normal, happy life. That was the rule of heaven. Because the crown prince had interfered with her selection as crown princess, violating heaven's rule, she fell ill. Even Yeon-woo's family could be completely destroyed for concealing her illness. The Queen Dowager aimed to use this to make the crown prince compliant, accepting everything. But how could he give her up so easily? Yeon-woo's family consulted numerous doctors, but none could diagnose her illness. Her condition worsened. Her father, distraught, paced his courtyard. Suddenly, a sorcerer appeared, claiming he could diagnose Yeon-woo's ailment. Desperate, the father agreed. The sorcerer examined Yeon-woo and informed him that she suffered from an incurable illness, destined for increasing agony. Rather than watch his daughter suffer, he should end her life sooner. Yeon-woo's father was left with an impossible choice. Meanwhile, at Bo Kyung's home, she asked her father if he had killed Yeon-woo. Lee Hyung replied, "If you wish to become crown princess, cast aside compassion and guilt. I will arrange everything." The following day, at Lee Hyung's behest, the court officials urged the king to choose a new crown princess. The king, though distressed, couldn't refuse. Overhearing this, the crown prince rose to plead with the king to revoke the order, but a court official advised him to give up. He explained that this would be futile and only provide Lee Hyung with more leverage. The crown prince felt a surge of anger. He couldn't protect the woman he loved. That night, he secretly left the palace and went to Yeon-woo's room, weeping and apologizing. He gave her a phoenix hairpin, hoping it would protect her. Yeon-woo, too, wept and bid the crown prince farewell. The next day, Yeon-woo coughed up blood, her condition rapidly deteriorating. Her father, unable to bear it any longer, finally decided to follow the sorcerer's advice. She drank the poison her father had prepared, comforting him and telling him not to grieve. Tears streaming down his face, her father called her name, Yeon-woo, but she was gone. However, unknown to anyone, for Yeon-woo, this wasn't the end, but a new beginning. After the family laid her to rest that night, the sorcerer arrived and opened her grave. The sound of the shovel disturbed Yeon-woo in her coffin. Disoriented, she didn't know where she was. The air grew thin, forcing her to pound on the coffin. At that moment, someone approached from behind. The sorcerer turned around. It was Yeon-woo's maidservant. With their help, Yeon-woo saw the sunlight again. However, when Yeon-woo awoke the next day, she had completely lost her memory, not recognizing herself or her maidservant. This amnesia greatly relieved the sorcerer. She told Yeon-woo she'd found her on the street, gravely ill, and had used magic to cure her, hence the memory loss. From that point on, Yeon-woo would follow her and become a sorcerer. She gave her the name Gon, meaning moon. Yeon-woo, with no other options, could only agree. The sorcerer resigned her position and, with Yeon-woo, left the capital, heading south. The crown prince, who loved Yeon-woo deeply, remained unaware that he was living each day in a hazy, directionless longing. Prince Yeon-myung found him, suffering from the loss of the crown prince, who had lost Yeon-woo because of his selfishness and weakness. The crown prince always claimed to love Yeon-woo, but when she was cast out of the palace like a criminal, what did he do? When she suffered unimaginable pain, when she was buried in the cold earth, and now, with her family facing exile, the crown prince only remained silent. Only then did he discover his brother also deeply loved Yeon-woo. After a confession, Myeong-gun disappeared, and the crown prince vowed to protect Yeon-woo in his next life. A new crown princess was quickly installed, a successful maneuver orchestrated by Dowager Queen Bo Kyung. On their wedding day, heavy rain fell, as if mourning Yeon-woo's fate. The crown prince caught the raindrops in his hands. He couldn't forget her. 8 years passed. The crown prince ascended the throne, becoming king, while Bo Kyung became queen. Yet, the Grand Dowager Empress remained a powerful presence, and the court was still controlled by Lee Hyung and his followers. The king's hatred of Lee Hyung's influence resulted in a cold, childless marriage to the queen. Bo Kyung's position remained precarious. Lee Hyung negotiated with the Grand Dowager Empress, suggesting the king temporarily withdraw from politics to recuperate at an outlying palace. Initially refusing, the king was forced by the Grand Dowager Empress's hunger strike. The queen also pleaded with the Grand Dowager Empress, kneeling before her chambers and begging for the king's forgiveness. Hearing the news, the king swiftly arrived, helping Bo Kyung rise, and then whispered a mocking comment about her artificial display of virtue and piety. He remembered his wedding vows. She and her family would receive everything she desired, but never his heart. Unbeknownst to the queen, 8 years later, Yeon-woo had passed away, becoming a ghost. Gon, about to return from the other side, and Seo were approaching. A shaman conducting a ritual received a letter from a fortune teller, predicting a shift in celestial energy and requesting a meeting. The shaman left Gon and Seo behind, swiftly departing. Free from their obligation, the two girls didn't rush to the mountain but strolled through the town. Meanwhile, the king, forced by the Grand Dowager Empress to leave the palace for treatment, arrived in the town. People lined up to see him, eager for a glimpse of the king. Gon and Seo also went to watch. A butterfly captured Gon's attention. Following it, she stood and inadvertently saw the king. She froze, a sense of familiarity overwhelming her. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Her maid urged Gon to kneel, but Gon ignored her. Seo pulled Gon away as soldiers pursued them, and fragments of hazy memories surfaced in Gon's mind. They escaped to a secluded spot. The king, seeking a better understanding of his people's situation, was shadowed by Lee Hyung's men. To shake them, he took his personal guard, Jun. As night fell, a thick fog enveloped them, causing the king to lose his way. A figure emerged. He vaguely saw a young Yeon-woo, but it wasn't her. Gon and Seo invited the king into their home. He couldn't take his eyes off Gon, who strongly resembled the Yeon-woo of his past voice, mannerism, and gestures alike. The king raised his cup and drank it down. Gon told the guard, "How could you let the king drink first? What if it was poisoned?" The king then pulled Gon close and asked how she knew his identity. He hoped Gon would reveal herself as Yeon-woo, but she explained that she had seen the king's royal procession earlier that day. The king was deeply disappointed. As the fog outside gradually cleared, revealing the bright moonlight, the king returned to his chambers in despair. Shortly afterward, the king returned to the capital. Leaving the palace, he discovered that Kim Song had conscripted many young men under the guise of constructing a palace for the Dowager Empress's birthday celebrations, accompanied by widespread embezzlement. He ordered Kim Song to immediately submit a list of all expenditures and invoices, intending a thorough investigation. Kim Song, a man of Di Hyung's, would certainly obstruct the investigation. Di Hyung approached the shaman of the Jingsuk Palace at night, requesting a curse to afflict the king with illness. The king indeed fell ill, and even the royal physicians couldn't determine the cause. The queen reported this to the Grand Dowager Empress, unaware of Di Hyung's actions. She suggested that if human help failed, they should rely on divine power, ordering the search for a shaman. After the previous incident with the strangers, Gon no longer wished to remain on the mountain and descended to seek her own shaman. At that time, representatives of the Grand Dowager Empress arrived, inviting the shaman back to Jingsuk Palace, but she refused. Unexpectedly, they kidnapped Gon as a hostage. Along the way, Gon escaped and coincidentally encountered Prince Yeon-woo, who immediately recognized her as Yeon-woo from the past, though she had no memory of it. Those pursuing Gon arrived. Mong-gun allowed Gon to flee, but she was still captured, and he was injured. Gon was imprisoned in Jingsuk Palace. An official reported to the queen, suggesting that utilizing Gon as a shaman to protect the king was their most important task. Fearing the king's disapproval, the queen ordered the royal physicians to drug his tea. That night, Gon, prepared by a palace servant, was brought to the king's chambers. Dun, standing by, realized this wasn't the shaman they encountered while lost. He placed his hand on his sword, watching the sleeping king who called out Yeon-woo's name. Tears welled in his eyes. Gon reached out and touched the king. Two people who once loved each other were now near, yet unable to recognize one another, perhaps the greatest sorrow. After that night, the king's condition significantly improved. He felt someone near him the previous night, but when he inquired, the court officials attributed it to the shaman's spell. The king remained unaware that it was Yeon-woo. The palace maids were astonished by the transformation of the once cold king, who now possessed a radiant smile and treated others with kindness. During the first afternoon, the heads of households submitted a register to the king. Although he found no direct evidence, he suspected Di Hyung and his accomplices. The conscription of so many strong men wasn't for palace construction, but for military training. When the king's spirits improved, the shaman came to Jingsuk Palace to take Gon, only to encounter the Grand Dowager Empress, who forbade Gon's departure, needing her to continue protecting the king. The shaman, left with no choice, agreed to return to Jingsuk Palace. After the Grand Dowager Empress left, the shaman scolded Gon for her disobedience and troublemaking. Gon explained she was only trying to protect the king. The shaman collapsed, seemingly resigned to a destiny neither could change. But before reaching the final outcome, a thorny path remained, one Gon must traverse alone. A mother awoke from a terrifying dream. She had dreamt her daughter died in the middle of the night. The shock was immense, but upon waking, she found her supposedly deceased daughter sitting beside her. Still worried, the mother noted her daughter's light clothing in the cold weather. Mother and daughter embraced, caressing each other's faces. "Mother, please stay healthy," the daughter whispered. The mother realized it had all been a dream conjured by a sorceress, Gon, who had sent Yeon-woo into the dreams of others for just one day. Earlier, Gon had been summoned to the king's chambers to treat his strange illness. Seeing the king's fear, Gon used her methods to comfort him, but suddenly awoke to find a woman beside her. The king sat up, pinning the woman down, and summoned guards. He demanded to know her identity. She explained she was a sorceress protecting the king, a guardian spirit to help him navigate the treacherous currents of courtly power. The king, however, was unconvinced. The woman resembled his deceased lover, Yeon-woo, and he suspected her of being an enemy spy, using her appearance to seduce him. He angrily ordered her imprisonment. That same night, Queen Bo Kyung also dreamt of Yeon-woo as a child. She awoke terrified, confiding in her father about her recurring dreams of Yeon-woo and the king's improving health, thanks to the sorceress Gon. Although unaware that Gon was Yeon-woo, she worried. Even a lowly sorceress, a close advisor warned her, could pose a significant threat. Meanwhile, low-ranking officials hastily accused Gon of treason, hoping to disgrace and banish her. The king immediately dispatched trusted individuals to investigate Gon's past. they discovered she was a registered sorceress of the Starry Assembly, not affiliated with Di Hyung's faction. Relieved, the king immediately sent orders to overturn Gon's punishment. Yet, the image of Yeon-woo remained deeply etched in his mind. He understood this woman, who looked so much like Yeon-woo, would bring a unique experience to his life. Gon was allowed to return to her position as the king's protective sorceress. The queen, learning of this, went to the king's quarters and, peering through an open door, witnessed the king's gaze upon Gon. Suppressing her fury, the queen returned to the palace, where she exploded. For 8 years, the king hadn't touched her, yet now he showed affection for a sorceress. Gon watched the king sleep, noticing he occasionally dreamt of her. One day, a guard delivered a letter found near Gon's quarters to the king. Surprised, he found Gon's handwriting strikingly similar to Yeon-woo's from years ago. That night, Gon again came to protect him. He inquired about Gon's origins. Having lost her memory as a child, Gon herself didn't know. The king, consumed by a mixture of longing and confusion, questioned her with tear-filled eyes. Gon insisted, despite the resemblance, she wasn't the woman he sought. The king, however, found it hard to let go. He searched records from 8 years prior, discovering scant information regarding Yeon-woo's death, only 3 words, died of illness. This illness, however, was too sudden. If she had fallen ill before her selection, her family wouldn't have been implicated. If after, she wouldn't have been expelled from the palace. This fueled his determination to investigate further. He suspected the previous, astute king must have realized something was amiss and investigated. Thus, he secretly left the palace to seek this person, but was avoided. This only strengthened the king's belief that Yeon-woo's death concealed a hidden truth. He left a message requesting a meeting. Fate, it is said, is miraculous. The king and his attendants strolled the streets to relieve stress, unexpectedly encountering Gon wandering aimlessly. Gon was captivated by a lacquerware shop, triggering faint, disturbing memories that nearly caused her to faint. Fortunately, the king caught her before she fell. During their casual conversation, the king confessed to feeling tired and achy all over, implying the protective spells weren't working. Concerned, Gon anxiously inquired about his health. This unexpected display of care flustered the king, who hastily bid her farewell and prepared to return to the palace. Before he could go far, Gon encountered 2 adults harshly scolding a child. Kindly intervening, she pleaded with them to stop, but the adults remained unyielding, even ordering their servant to seize Gon. Just then, the king dramatically appeared, a scene of heroic rescue unfolding as he took Gon's hand and fled. Before they had gone far, they were drawn to a puppet show in the street. The show's organizers pulled them into the audience. The king dismissed the puppet show as frivolous, but Gon found it delightful. Watching Gon's captivated expression, the king mused that if Yeon-woo were still alive, she too would have enjoyed such romantic puppet shows. At that moment, Crown Prince Yeon-myung, who had been searching for Yeon-woo, passed by. Seeing the king and Gon gazing at each other intently, his eyes brimming with emotion, he silently departed in sorrow. 8 years ago, he had been willing to renounce his princely title, his position, everything he had, just to be with Yeon-woo. But she had treated it as a joke. 8 years later, he would still give up everything for Yeon-woo, believing this woman to be her. Now, however, he no longer had a chance. The king had taken everything from him. Later, he sought Gon, uttering a series of incomprehensible phrases before leaving. If he truly loved her, he seemed to imply, he would let her decide. The queen's anxiety grew daily as she contemplated Gon. She intended to discuss the matter with the Grand Queen Dowager, but upon arriving, she unexpectedly met Gon departing. Gon, sensing the queen's presence, had already reported to the Grand Queen Dowager, suggesting replacing Gon with a court lady to foster a better relationship between the king and queen. Confronted by the queen, who remarked on Gon's resemblance to an old acquaintance, the lady-in-waiting reassured her that Gon would no longer enter the palace and urged the queen to refrain from causing trouble with the Grand Queen Dowager. However, the queen refused to yield. Noticing the queen's resolve, the lady-in-waiting asked when she had last heard a child cry from the East Palace. This shifted the queen's expression. Though she had been queen for 8 years, she remained childless. She resolved to aggressively pursue consummation with the king. She approached her father, Di Hyung, a powerful figure in court. She told him about the king's affection for Gon, claiming that Gon had entered the palace to improve the king's health. But every time the king refused consummation, he used his poor health as an excuse. If his health was poor, she argued, it was Gon's failure. Lee Hyung grasped this immediately and suggested that the king should prioritize the country and his family. An heir was needed. The king fell into the trap, repeating that his health was poor. Lee Hyung seized on this, stating that Gon had been in the palace for a long time, yet had failed to improve the king's health. Therefore, she should be punished. The king was momentarily stopped, but ultimately agreed to consummate the marriage. That night, the king arrived at the queen's quarters, roughly pulling her toward him, preparing for consummation. However, at that moment, a sorcerer was found performing a dark magic on the king. A strange energy surge was sensed by Gon as well. The king suddenly collapsed, plunging the palace into chaos. The queen's attempt failed again. The royal physicians were helpless, leading to Gon's being summoned once more to guard the king's bedside. Thanks to Gon's protection, the king finally awoke. Seeing this, Gon rejoiced. The king even playfully teased Gon, asking if she worried he might fall for another woman. The queen, unable to bear her continued failures, accused Gon before the Grand Queen Dowager, claiming Gon, harboring romantic feelings for the king, had secretly used magic to sabotage the consummation. Rumors spread that Gon had used magic to charm the king, surpassing her own status. Lee Hyung and his associates sought to use this to completely control the king, subsequently imprisoning Gon. Lee Hyung told Gon that if she confessed to using magic to sabotage the consummation due to her feelings for the king, her life would be spared. Naturally, Gon refused. A sorceress was a low-status individual, and if the king felt affection for a low-status woman, the officials and scholars would consider the king's actions as morally reprehensible, further eroding his support within the court. To force Gon's confession, Lee Hyung subjected her to brutal torture. Upon learning of this, the king immediately rushed to intervene, precisely what Lee Hyung had hoped for. If the king forcefully took Gon away, their relationship would be made clear, and the king would face criticism. This time, Lee Hyung had completely manipulated the king, leaving him to return to the palace with a heart filled with rage. Once again, he had failed to save the woman he loved. Meanwhile, Gon endured horrific torture, a truly heartbreaking sight. Despite Lee Hyung's relentless pressure, she refused to admit to using magic on the king. However, Lee Hyung ordered Gon to be beaten until she confessed. The sorceress, meanwhile, rushed to the Grand Queen Dowager's residence, using the 8-year-old conspiracy to murder Yeon-woo as leverage, threatening the Dowager to save Gon. The Dowager was furious, but at that moment, the king arrived. The sorceress retreated, and the king pleaded for the Dowager to save Gon, promising future repayment. Seizing the opportunity, the Grand Queen Dowager agreed. Just as Gon lay on the brink of death, Yeon-woo burst in, declaring that on the night of the king's attempted consummation, he and Gon were together. He willingly sacrificed his reputation to save Gon. The Dowager dispatched a secret message to Lee Hyung, ordering him to halt the torture. However, Gon remained imprisoned. Yeon-woo then sought the king, as he had 8 years ago, requesting permission to marry Gon. The king refused, fearing it would damage the royal family's reputation. Yeon-woo declared that if the king would simply remove him from the royal family, he would renounce all his titles and lands. The king still refused, fearing Gon would be taken from him by another. Fearing his love for Gon was no match for another's, just as with Yeon-woo 8 years prior. The prince left the palace in frustration. Gon was quickly convicted of enchanting a royal family member and sentenced to exile to the borderlands to care for soldiers and exiled people. Yeon-woo, for saving Gon, was targeted by Lee Hyung for tarnishing the royal family's name. The king disagreed, but Lee Hyung acted first and reported later, stationing guards outside Yeon-woo's residence, effectively placing him under house arrest after issuing a travel ban. Yeon-woo felt betrayed, blaming the king for everything. The king visited Gon in prison, witnessing her injuries and unbearable suffering. He maintained a composed demeanor, wanting to protect her, his method of protection being to sever Gon's attachment to him. He coldly said, "I only came to see you. Now you can stay away from me." After visiting Gon, the king felt despair. Gon had always shown him unspoken love, but he only brought her endless suffering. He had never offered a single warm word. The sorceress saw celestial signs indicating that the severed connection would be divinely restored, everything returning to its original place. but with a bloody conflict to follow. Visiting Gon in prison and seeing her severe injuries, the sorceress felt remorse and self-reproach. She remembered her promise to her friend to care for Yeon-woo, but she had let Yeon-woo suffer greatly. The sorceress knelt before Gon and urged her to trust herself, to make her own decisions. Gon was stronger and wiser than anyone. She would undoubtedly make the right choice. Gon was swiftly taken to the border. The king, disguised, secretly escorted her a distance. As guards led Gon through the bustling streets, the surrounding people pointed and jeered, throwing refuse and food at her. At that moment, her mother caught sight of Gon. Lost in the crowd, Gon's mother stumbled and fell. Gon turned back, experiencing an inexplicable sense of loss, a further separation between mother and daughter. Meanwhile, in the palace, a girl's nightly cries terrified the queen, who had committed numerous misdeeds. Anxiously, she questioned her attendant, but the attendant, bewildered, reported no unusual sounds. When the queen looked in the mirror, she saw a childhood image of Yeon-woo. The strange cries also echoed in the ears of the Grand Queen Dowager, filling her with dread. They believed it to be the ghost of the former crown princess. Court officials suggested seeking a sorceress from the Starry Assembly, but after the previous incident, the Dowager distrusted sorceresses. The officials added that they could find someone to act as a spirit medium, a living person entering the East Palace to appease the ghost. Only Gon could perform this, at the risk of her life. The Grand Queen Dowager saw this as an opportunity to bring Gon back into the palace, sealing her in a room with protective charms to prevent the spirit's escape. The woman was trapped in a haunted room. Searching for an escape, she saw the room was filled with protective charms and the deceased crown princess's clothes on the floor. She realized she was to be a spirit medium, a ritual where the spirits of the living and dead collided, potentially destroying both. A lunar eclipse occurred that night, darkness prevailing. The woman saw the deceased crown princess sitting before her, asking about her grievances. The crown princess slowly turned her head, and in that moment of their eyes meeting, the woman suddenly awoke, realizing it was all a dream. Yet, her chest felt heavy, as if strangled. Slowly, she moved toward the door, vague memories surfacing, the lunar eclipse ending. She slowly recalled events from 8 years earlier. She was the murdered crown princess. That year, she found her own spirit in this very room. The next day, court officials opened the room. A brave guard checked on the woman. She slowly raised her head, alive, yet transformed. The sun and moon aligned. The sorceress sensed the moon's awakening. Rose, who had performed the spirit medium ritual on Gon, was transferred to the borderlands. Yeon-myung, knowing Gon would be sent there, waited. He saw people suffering and lacking funds for treatment. A poor, gravely ill girl. The prince saved her, his clothes stained with her vomit. Gon, arriving late, witnessed his kindness and compassion, happy to see her well again. Gon secretly sought out a childhood servant, revealing she'd regained her memories. To protect Gon, her father had given her medicine, and the sorceress had hidden her in a tomb. Only the sorceress and Seo knew and kept it secret to protect her. It was her father's death anniversary. Gon and Seo visited his tomb, facing his image once more. Gon was filled with longing and self-reproach. Her mother and brother also arrived. Gon's mother told her brother that their father had lived in sorrow and self-reproach over Gon's fate. Seeing his brother marry a princess, he felt his duty was done, but guilty toward Gon, committing suicide. Hearing this, the princess dropped the offerings in fright. Gon's mother expressed her love and longing for Gon. Gon listened from behind a wall, unable to approach her mother, silently weeping. Before revealing the truth, she hesitated, fearing danger for her family. On the other hand, the emperor investigated the possibility that Yeon-woo's death years ago was caused by magic. He immediately summoned a sorceress, but she didn't go to him directly. Instead, she sought out Wall first. The sorceress revealed all the mistakes she had made. Wall stated that the most unacceptable thing was the sorceress telling her father that she had died. Her father, blaming himself for his daughter's supposed death, had committed suicide. The sorceress explained to Wall that she had acted partly to fulfill a promise to a deceased friend to save Wall, and partly due to the Empress Dowager's orders. She also revealed that a sacrifice was needed to perform the death curse. The princess had volunteered as a sacrifice to fulfill her own wishes, contributing to the curse meant for Wall's death. However, the princess also served as a shield for the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager deliberately implicated her. Even if the truth were revealed, it could only be concealed. Otherwise, the princess would face severe punishment. Wall's brother, the princess's husband, was also unavoidably involved. Wall knew the truth, but felt powerless. She couldn't reveal it and suffered immensely from being unable to acknowledge her family. The following day, the sorceress entered the palace to see the king. The king asked if black magic could kill someone. The sorceress replied that it couldn't. To use black magic to kill someone, the caster would have to sacrifice their own life. Therefore, no sorceress would do so. The king remained unconvinced. If magic wasn't responsible for Yeon-woo's fatal illness, why was the Starry Night Palace so heavily guarded at the time? He suddenly remembered what the investigator had told him. After Yeon-woo stopped breathing, her father had held her for 2 hours, and her body remained warm. Initially, everyone attributed this to her father's body heat, but now it seemed she hadn't actually died. He recalled his recent coldness towards Wall, trying to distinguish her from the Yeon-woo of the past, and now regretted it deeply. The next day, the king again summoned the sorceress. Unable to hide the truth any longer, the sorceress revealed to the king that Wall was the Yeon-woo of the past. All the hypotheses had become reality. The king stumbled out of the palace. He hadn't been able to protect Yeon-woo in the past, and now Wall had suffered so much. He felt utterly unworthy of love. The king's investigation also attracted Lee Hyung's attention. He too was surprised to realize the resemblance between the young Yeon-woo and the current Wall. To eliminate the threat, he sent men to kill Wall. The king found Wall, the woman he had longed for, standing before him. Their long-awaited reunion was marked by tears and embraces. Witnessing this, Yang Myung left in anguish. Suddenly, a group of black-cloaked assassins, sent by Lee Hyung, attacked. The king and his guards fought the assassins. In the chaos, Yang Myung took Wall to the temple where his mother resided. Before he could introduce her, Yang Myung collapsed. After treating Yang Myung's wounds, his mother recognized the girl as Yeon-woo. After further confirmation, the prince's mother was overcome with sadness and pain. It was another karmic entanglement. Why Yeon-woo? She knew Yeon-woo had been betrothed to the crown prince since childhood. Why her? That Yang Myung would forsake wealth and status for her filled her with pity for her son's sorrowful romance. After escaping the assassins, the king returned to the palace, consumed by rage. He resented Lee Hyung for ordering his assassination and disliked Yang Myung for taking Wall away. He sent men to find Wall and Yang Myung. Yang Myung awoke to find Wall still there, filling him with joy. Wall knew he had discovered her identity long ago, but Yang Myung didn't want to accept the truth. He hoped Wall would remain a sorceress forever. All joy felt like a fading dream. He missed the days when Wall lived a normal life. Wall was grateful to Yang Myung for his unwavering support, but she couldn't fulfill his desires. She hoped he would find a happier marriage. As Wall prepared to leave, Yang Myung grasped her hand, begging her to stay. At that moment, the king arrived and ordered Wall's arrest. He hid Wall in a secret room within his palace, eager to finally see her after she'd changed clothes. At this moment, Wall confessed her heart belonged to him. Overjoyed, the king embraced her. Wall and the king were finally together. Wall was content to live this way, hidden from the world, as long as she could be with him. She didn't mind a life concealed in shadows, as long as she was by his side. She didn't want to cause him pain by revealing the truth. That evening, the king and Wall held hands for the first time and slept beside each other. To take the woman from the king, a man held a blade to his throat. This man was the king's own brother. The king told him that by killing him, he would gain the throne and the woman he loved. The man knew this was a test, and ultimately, he couldn't kill the king. He could only watch as his beloved and his brother found happiness together. When Yang Myung returned to his quarters, Lee Hyung approached him, urging him to seize the throne. Yang Myung, a man of integrity, couldn't be easily swayed to betrayal. Lee Hyung compared him to the king, using the late king's favoritism towards the king and the betrothal of Wall to the crown prince as fuel to incite him. But Yang Myung saw through Lee Hyung's scheme. He stated that Lee Hyung had misjudged him. He wasn't someone who would betray his country out of resentment and envy. Moreover, glory, wealth, honor, power, and the throne held no interest for him. Disappointed, Lee Hyung considered him a useless pawn to be discarded. Just as Lee Hyung drew his sword, Yang Mayang declared that all he wanted was Wall. What was Yang Mayang's true motive? Was it genuine affection or something else? Suddenly, the Grand Queen Dowager arrived, demanding the king hand over Wall. She also demanded he cease his investigation into the incident 8 years prior. The king, seeking the truth, refused. The Queen Dowager revealed that the late king had also investigated but ultimately chose to bury the truth. She warned that if he continued, he would lose someone he cherished most. The king, not understanding the implication, dismissed her. He assured Wall he would seek justice for her. However, Wall urged him to let the past remain buried. But the king, stubborn in his pursuit of truth, persisted. After a few days, the king's investigator reported that the black magic used to kill Yeon-woo required a sacrifice. The sacrificer wouldn't suffer any consequences, but they had to possess a strong desire to kill someone. The king recalled previous clues. Before abandoning the investigation, the late king had visited both the princesses and the Grand Queen Dowager's quarters. The king finally realized the truth. The person he was about to lose, the one closest to him, was his own sister Princess Minhwa. Years ago, the late king had investigated to this point and then stopped. The king had thought his father weak, but in reality, he was protecting them. Protecting Princess Minhwa meant abandoning the crown prince. Protecting him meant abandoning Prince Yang Mayang. Before, as crown prince, he only sought truth and justice. Now, as king, he had to consider the greater good. He realized he had forgotten his initial aspirations and felt disgusted with himself. Caught in the crossroads of space and time, the young king resolved to uncover the whole truth. He confronted Princess Minhwa. Upon hearing the truth revealed, Minhwa wept, claiming she hadn't known her actions would kill Yeon-woo. She had only followed the Grand Queen Dowager's instructions so she could marry Hyo-yeom. She begged her brother not to tell her husband and to let her give birth first. Knowing his sister was pregnant, the king was once again caught in a dilemma. Returning home, Princess Minhwa was consumed by guilt. She collapsed into Hyo-yeom's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. In the palace, Gon advised the king to give up. The king wept and said he couldn't. Were the years he had spent with her meaningless? Was his father's death not unjust? The next day, the king went to the Empress Dowager and demanded she immediately retire to a palace in the suburbs, forbidden from returning to the capital without permission. Naturally, the Empress Dowager was unwilling. The king stated that this was his final respect for her. Regardless of whether the 8-year-old incident involved the princess or someone else, he would investigate thoroughly. Having lost the princess as a shield, the Empress Dowager was left only with anger. When Di Hyung learned that the Empress Dowager had been sidelined, he had to act, eliminating all those who caused him trouble. Men in black, sent by Di Hyung, surrounded Hyo-yeom. Not knowing what to do, Hyo-yeom was defended by his sister's maid, Seo. Seo fought valiantly to protect Hyo-yeom, but ultimately couldn't withstand them. She was seriously wounded and fell into Hyo-yeom's arms. Seo, gazing at Hyo-yeom, confessed that since she came to the house, the master had given her the name Seo. No one called her the little girl anymore. From that moment until now, she had always held affection for the master in her heart. She took her last breath in his arms, dying to protect her beloved, making her extremely happy. Upon hearing of Seo's death, everyone around wept. Even Gon couldn't hold back her tears. Hearing this news, the king realized the Empress Dowager might be in danger. When he sent someone to protect her, she had already been poisoned and killed by Di Hyung. Di Hyung and Prince Yang Mayang set a date for their rebellion that night. All those supporting Yang Mayang gathered. Di Hyung said that the martial arts performance in the palace in a few days would be the best time to overthrow the king and install Yang Mayang. Yang Mayang took out a register and wrote his name, then asked the conspirators to write their names. He told them this was a record of those who had contributed to the coup. The sorceress saw that the sun and moon were aligning, knowing a major event was imminent. She wanted to predict whether it would be good fortune or disaster. So, she took a bowl of clean water, clasped her hands, and began to chant. A current of air blew into the water, turning it into blood, signifying an impending bloody disaster. Immediately, she went to the palace and met Gon, telling her that someone would use magic to harm her that night. Gon was startled and worried that this would affect the king. The sorceress said she would block the curse. That night, the sorceress cut her palm, letting blood drip onto a charm, then burned the charm in an incense burner. As the magic continued, a plume of black smoke rose from the incense burner. She used all her strength to block the curse, vomiting blood and falling to the ground. Another sorceress attempting the curse suddenly collapsed. The queen's sorceress failed to cast the curse successfully and was possessed. She leveled numerous accusations against the queen, causing the queen to become possessed and incessantly frantic, driving her to madness. It turned out that the queen had previously summoned another sorceress, requesting a dark curse against Gon to inflict pain upon her once more. The queen knew that with a suitable sacrifice, Gon would die instantly. Upon hearing this, she immediately told the sorceress that she herself was the best sacrifice. But this disaster had not ended, it had only just begun. The next day, the martial arts performance began. The king descended the steps. The officials around him each harbored their own plans. He looked at Di Hyung, then at his brother, Yang Myung. Yang Myung's gaze avoided his. At that moment, Di Hyung's army surged from all directions into the martial arts arena. The rebellion began. The king and Yang Myung faced each other, swords drawn, pointed at each other's throats. Di Hyung stood behind Yang Myung, urging him to quickly eliminate this incompetent and useless king. Yang Myung instantly knocked the king's sword away, turning to strike down two rebels, creating an escape route. The king quickly ascended the palace steps. It turned out that the king and Yang Myung had planned everything beforehand, using Yang Myung's feigned rebellion to lure Di Hyung and his accomplices out of the shadows into a prepared trap. Standing on the steps, the pre-positioned soldiers surrounded the rebels. The king gave the order, and a bloody battle commenced. After a fierce fight, most of the rebels were dead or wounded. Only Di Hyung remained. Yang Myung swung his sword, killing Di Hyung. Far off, near the palace gate, another rebel slowly rose. The king reminded Yang Myung, and then they both looked at each other. Yang Myung didn't evade. This was the best way for him to protect the king. Without him, there would be no further rebellions. Trembling, Yang Myung gave the king the list of rebels' names. In the final moment of his life, he remembered the Yeon-woo of the past, a love that should not have been, born into a family he shouldn't have been born into. Yang Myung ended his sorrowful life with a smile. At that moment, in the sky, two suns merged into one. Seeing this, the young sorceress began to weep in pain, calling out the name of her beloved brother. The sorceress looked up at the sky. She knew that what had to happen had finally occurred. The love and hatred between one moon and two suns had finally drawn to a close. Queen Bo Kyung, aware of her father's plot and knowing she would undoubtedly be confined to the cold palace, recalled her early days in the palace. Upon seeing the crown prince, the only thing she desired was his heart, but it all became void. In her final moments, she wanted to die as a queen. Gon finally reunited with her mother at the temple. They embraced and wept. Her mother couldn't believe it was real, suspecting she was dreaming. Her brother also reunited with Gon after a long separation. Their family was finally reunited. A close friend took Yang Myung's body to his mother. Losing her son, the mother was consumed by uncontrollable grief. Going outside again, she saw Yang Myung's spirit. He told his friend he no longer needed to feign smiles, force himself to drink alcohol he disliked, or be a threat to the emperor. Most importantly, he could love without any constraints. How wonderful that was. A few days later, Gon regained her status and became queen. Their love story, in this era, faced many difficulties for the sake of the nation, forcing them to separate. But in the end, fate brought them together. After 8 years apart, they finally lived happily together. Not long after, they became parents. Their firstborn son was a lovely child. Gon's son and Hyo-yeom's son played together. The little prince loved playing with swords, causing the king to remark that his firstborn son was very much like Yang Myung, possessing a similarly optimistic and carefree personality. Mentioning this made everyone remember him. Finally, under Gon's influence, the king forgave the princess, but she still didn't receive acceptance from her family. Day after day, Hyo-yeom walked his son in town and discovered someone following them. Turning around, he saw the princess crying alone. The princess told Hyo-yeom that she missed her son terribly and had secretly come to see him. After speaking, she turned to leave. Hyo-yeom embraced her from behind, saying that for the sake of their son and those who had passed, hoping for a better life for them, the Yu family was finally reunited.